Well, good morning or good afternoon to all of our loyal fans and participants. This is the 3D Printing Leadership Forum on the future of the automotive industry. Today, we are blessed to have a very exciting panel of representatives of the future of mobility and transportation. And there is no secret that the whole mobility space has been undergoing a massive disruption already pre-COVID. We have seen a further exasperation of extended and complex supply chains and the impact of COVID, both on the incumbent transportation players and automakers. But today we're here to talk about how future disruption creates future opportunities, both in business model, innovation, and all the new use cases and applications that are in front of us post-COVID-19. And we're blessed to have a very exciting panel today, starting with Mark Frohnmayer, who is the founder and CEO of Arikimoto, an electric vehicle manufacturing company out of Oregon that is bringing to market a fun utility vehicle. We had the pleasure to work with Mark on a lightweighting and 3D printing project that I'm sure he'll mention later. We have Michael Granoff from Tel Aviv, the founder and managing director of Maniv Mobility, a VC firm that is already on its second journey of making very insightful investments in the future of mobility and its various business models. Tarek Bolat, who is the co-founder and CEO of WaveSense, a company that is bringing ground penetration radar technology to commercial autonomous vehicles as an alternative to the traditional LiDAR technology that is being broadly used today. And we have Richard Steiner, who is the head of policy and communications for Gatic AI, the company behind autonomous vehicle for B2B short-haul logistics. I'm Avi Reichental, your faithful moderator today, co-founder and CEO of Nexa3D, the fastest 3D printing company on the market today, and the founder of Exponential Works. With that, I like to begin the discussion with all of our esteemed panel members here. We're going to take about 45 minutes to have an insightful discussion about challenges, opportunities, disruption, how we harvest the upside of the disruption, what each of you brings to the party here in terms of the future of mobility and transportation. We'll talk a little bit about the current state of the economy, your views about that, and how your companies are managing through COVID and beyond COVID. I like to start, Michael, with you, if you don't mind. And please expand on the introduction of what Maniv Mobility is doing, and also tell us how do you assess the current venture capital investment environment, and what is Maniv looking for, and how do you navigate this period?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for having me. So as you said, Maniv Mobility is a venture fund, but it's interesting, we have mobility in the name and we don't have venture, because we really are very focused on mobility, and I've actually approached it from a policy perspective. I was involved in a breakthrough electric vehicle company years ago, and really this is where our passion is. And going to your question, this is where we believe the opportunity is, that effectively over the last few decades we've seen communications and information get digitized, and I think we're in the very early innings of seeing transportation get digitized, and that's really what we see as the opportunity in digital mobility. So as you said, we're investing out of our second fund, about $150 million under management, about 28 portfolio companies. About 2/3 of them are in Israel, but increasingly we are investing globally, and increasingly we're getting away from some of the deep tech and closer to the market. Thanks to my son right behind me, you can see an electric moped that is on a shared platform with a company called Revel that's in 5 US cities right now and doing particularly well in New York City. It's a somewhat sad and strange thing to be able to say that right now to get around New York City, to do so on a moped is safer than to do so on a subway. And we certainly didn't intend to compete against mass transit, but we're in a very strange period, as we all know. And in fact, it has done well and really been a service for healthcare workers in particular, for whom we made the service free at the beginning of the crisis. So that's a little bit about Maniv Mobility, and honored to be part of the panel.
Well, thank you, Michael, and I'll come back to you a little bit later to talk about the overall investment climate and what advice you might have for other early stage companies. But I wanted to turn Mark to you, and you have dedicated, in essence, a big part of the last decade to bring your vision of micromobility to market. Talk about where you are, and also, if you don't mind, touch a little bit also on how you take your capabilities to the next level, both in terms of technology capabilities, but also how does COVID in any way become a catalyst for Arcimoto?
Sure. Well, and so Arcimoto, and you can really think about it, you know, unlike, say, getting people to switch, whether, you know, pandemic or no, to a totally different mode of transportation, like going from mass transit to a scooter or going from a car to a bicycle. Arcimoto is really based around the disconnect between the vehicles that we use now and what we use them for. So the cars that we have on the road today are amazing constructs, but they're way over capacity for how they are typically used. And so what we did is we looked really carefully at how people actually use cars on a daily basis, 1 and 2 people traveling a relatively short distance with a small amount of stuff, and really tailor built a platform for that use case. And it took us 7 years to come up with the right idea, another 3 years to go from concept prototypes to public offering, and then 2 years more to actually go into full production of our first product, the Fun Utility Vehicle. We started consumer first, so the FUV is very much a consumer product because we thought that it was important that people be able to make the choice, personal choice of clean transportation. So, I mean, just as a platform, we land in the gap between the two-wheelers, the motorcycles, and the scooters, and the full-size cars. So much closer to the two-wheelers in terms of size and efficiency, and closer to the full-size vehicles in terms of capability. Where we've now produced more than 100 vehicles on the Arcimoto platform, and I think, you know, one thing that's probably particularly relevant given the pandemic is that really right before the pandemic started changing things dramatically here, we introduced a version of our platform for first responders and another version for last mile delivery. And what we've seen over the last 8 weeks, 12 weeks, is that you know, delivery of groceries has 10x'd in terms of demand. Delivery of parcels, I mean, it's gone from a convenience to really a matter of life and health safety. And so that, I would say, in the post-COVID world, we're seeing last mile delivery and sort of that local community runabout as being a much larger component of transportation.
Thanks, Mark. Tarek, I wanted to turn it over to you and give you an opportunity first to explain the kind of capability and disruption that WaveSense is bringing to market, and also ask you specifically, how is the industry responding and adapting your technology in this COVID and post-COVID environment?
Sure. Thanks, Avi, for having me on the panel today. So WaveSense provides the world's most precise and reliable vehicle positioning system that exists. And we do that in a very unconventional way But ultimately, the upshot of it is that we're providing a GPS on steroids in effect. So centimeter level precision that works in all conditions, whether that's snow or rain or fog or areas that don't have trees or signs around them that you might typically use with a LiDAR camera. So it's in effect filling all of the gaps that LiDAR camera and GPS have with respect to vehicle positioning. And as a result, we're enabling a whole new set of features on passenger vehicles today and on trucks, as well as driving level 4 autonomy, so the ride hailing crowd, towards the tipping point of safety with respect to positioning that they need to actually build out big products there. And so the way that we generate a position for the vehicle is rather than looking around the surface as you would with a LiDAR or camera, we image the subsurface about 10 feet into the ground with a ground penetrating radar. So you're generating an image of things like roots, rocks, cavities, imperfections in concrete, and then you're simply matching to that. And you're able to do that in any condition. And so that's the technology side. On the business side, we've seen broad interest, and we're working closely with some of the major OEMs for both level 4 autonomy as well as specific passenger vehicle features on their existing platforms. And so I think if anything, to answer your COVID specific question, Avi, we haven't yet seen the sort of obvious slump in the actual auto business rip through to us, although, I think we have to be eyes wide open about that. What we have seen is that it's forced the OEMs to sort of pick and choose what's important for them. And in a way, it's sort of a clarifying and healthy, healthy process that WaveSense has been able to ride through then. So no doubt the current environment is going to be challenging for the auto sector generally, but I also think it's going to maybe force some clarifying moments in a very healthy way that will ultimately benefit the sector broadly.
That's very insightful. I tend to agree with you, Tarek, that it will be a clarifying event on many levels, particularly for the incumbents and how they further crystallize and crisp their not only strategies but execution plans in the nearer term. In the midterm, and I'll come back to that point a little bit later. But Richard, I wanted to give you also an opportunity to expand a little bit on what Gatik AI is doing, and specifically, what do you see in the market in terms of your unique delivery capabilities in COVID and beyond COVID?
Thanks, Avi, and thanks everyone involved for having me here. It's a privilege to be on the panel. So a little bit about Gatik. We are an autonomous delivery vehicle company founded in 2017. So our mission has always been to deliver goods safely and efficiently. We operate exclusively on what we call the middle mile. So that's a question of optimizing our retail customers' hub and spoke supply chain operations. So moving goods from what is ever increasingly the model of micro fulfillment centers and dark stores to retail stores, other distribution centers and collection points. We have a very dedicated focus on structured autonomy, which enables us to get to market, has enabled us to get to market, I should say, very quickly, and is enabling us to scale rapidly. And our use case is very specifically predetermined fixed routes. So we operate on routes with a fixed starting point, a fixed ending point, and that's enabled us to map out new routes incredibly quickly. And we're working with some very big customers. Walmart, I guess, is our flagship US customer with whom we've been operating on the road publicly since 2019, so July of 2019. From a COVID perspective, it's, what's the best way to put this? It's been busy, let me say that. I can tell you that we've seen an increase of about 30 to 35% in orders with our existing customers across North America, and that's both sides of the North American border, Canada and the US, and multiple jurisdictions. The customers that we're already working with, we've been helping to support their operations in terms of managing the dramatic increase in e-commerce that Mark referenced earlier. It's exploded for obvious reasons. We're also seeing a huge increase in interest from other folks who perhaps thought they were not at the stage where they were going to be considering contactless delivery and automating their on-road transportation networks, and are now saying, this is something we need to look at. In terms of some of the benefits, we can offer, we're able to transport all manner of essential goods. We have a fleet of class 2 to 6 vehicles. Our flagship vehicle that's been particularly useful for customers during this time has been our autonomous box truck. So we can transport refrigerated, frozen, and ambient goods. And of course, we're able to minimize the time that people have to spend either in stores or outside waiting for goods in contact with others. So reducing human-to-human transmission channels of COVID-19 and other communicable diseases. So yeah, it's been busy. There's been a lot going on, and we found ourselves in a position to be part of the solution. So yeah, very happy to play that role.
So I can see an emerging theme here that I wanted to maybe double click on and get deeper into, and that goes to the question to all of you. What part of your plan and strategy for 2020 are you keeping and executing to? And what portions of it have changed because of the cause and effect that the pandemic has on the human condition and human behavior, and the underlying trends that are influencing human behavior as a result of this pandemic? And maybe Michael, we'll start with you.
So as a venture fund, particularly one that invests in the early stage, we're long-term investors with patience, and so we're obviously all in a very unusual and a critical time right now. But I think also part of what comes along with being long-term investors is being optimistic. And as such, I am not one that believes that COVID is going to, by and large, cause permanent structural changes to the way that we live. I think this is something that we'll live with for some period of time. And the companies that we're backing are companies that we see going forward many years into the future. And long-term trends like urbanization, which maybe today people don't feel like being necessarily downtown crowded around a lot of people. I think that the many decades trend in that direction will continue in once it's safe. And so we haven't changed any of our underlying philosophies, and we haven't even really changed our pace. Our pace is dictated mostly by opportunities that come along and that we can get comfortable with, and we've been very, very active in speaking with companies throughout the crisis, and are not at all deterred to continue to invest. As far as our portfolio companies, obviously those that have financial, all startups have financial issues to always be aware about, and so many of them have cut costs in order to extend their runway maybe another quarter or two, in case it becomes difficult to fundraise. But on the other hand, as I said, Revel, our electric moped operator, and Bolt Bikes, which uses e-bikes for food delivery, are companies in which they've found this they've found that business is brisk in the crisis. So it by and large, we don't view this as something that will have tremendous long-term implications. The one thing I would say is that we've thought for a while that cities will begin to rethink architecture and road use, and that is something that conversation's been provoked by the micromobility revolution, by the scooters showing up in so many cities around the world, and that's something I think in a good way, will get accelerated. I think we're seeing signs of that from cities around the world now, where they're recognizing, when did we make the decision to put 80% of the road space to parked cars or cars that are driving or in traffic? And isn't there a better way to do this? And people want more space to be able to walk and socially distance or ride their bikes, as bike sales have exploded. And I think that'll be an excellent outcome.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, well, I mean, to the question of what has changed for us, I mean, I think a number of aspects of the business have changed dramatically in the near term. So in March, we paused production for the health of our team. We have since resumed production at a very low level to fulfill some of our near-term orders and to get our pilots of our new vehicle products out into the marketplace. So in terms of sort of what we had planned to do this year from a production side, those plans basically went right out the window. And it has also changed how we work together. So we have gone, although we're doing a physical production manufacturing operation for a big chunk of the company, all the people who can are working from home and working remotely. And that's changed not just how we interact as a team, but also how we interact business to business and go out and tell the story. So I mean, every road show that was real has gotten canceled, but we've been actually able to make very good use of that time over Zoom. And I think those sorts of trends are things that I see sticking around for a long time. I mean, the technology we're using right this moment is able to connect people from Israel to the West Coast of the United States to all around the world listening in. We basically are getting the benefit of 2 decades of maturation of that technology, and then finally a catalyst that makes it get adopted on a mass scale. What we have also done, though, from the business perspective, is this has really clarified our next stage of production step. The demand for our products continues to increase. And so we're focused, instead of focusing on sort of an incremental production ramp over the course of this year, we're really looking at a major step change coming next year. And that's the bulk of our planning effort right now, is just getting all of those ducks in a row to really hit the accelerator on production in 2021 and beyond. And I think from a product makeup standpoint, we at the beginning of the year, we were very focused around vacation rentals of the Fun Utility Vehicle as the market adoption driver. That has shifted to fleet adoption of the delivery, the Deliverator, which is our last mile delivery solution, being sort of priority number one. So a lot of changes, but the same platform and the same push to get to real scale manufacture as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think our approach here has been to say in any crisis, there's sort of 2 ends of the continuum. One is to pull back and totally conserve, or on the other side is to play the advantage and really invest, so you come out of it very strong. And we've tended, while like every other startup, we've been conserving cash. From a customer perspective, we've been really pushing forward aggressively in a way that we hope is going to allow us to be at the vanguard as we come out of this. And it sort of mirrors, if you talk to some of the auto execs or mobility execs that weathered the 2008 crisis, I think there was a lot of regret about not investing through that and coming out with stale portfolios. And in the case of some players, that ultimately made the ramp up sort of slow relative to their competitors. And so to the degree that we can, we're really trying to sort of press the advantage here, invest in our customer relationships so that we're sort of leading the pack as we come out here.
Richard?
Sure, happy to add to these comments. And I suppose it would be a cheap response to say that we've just had to work even harder, though I'll say that anyway. In terms of what we've been dealing with, it really is a question of expanding and scaling quite rapidly. As I mentioned, we're helping our customers manage an influx of e-commerce that they're coping with. So that's been huge for us. In terms of a more practical answer to the question, suddenly, as with many other companies in many other sectors out there, we suddenly developed COVID-19 or communicable disease related protocols and practices, right? And by that I mean within the autonomous vehicles that we operate, within the facilities that they are stored, with our autonomous vehicle operators or safety drivers aboard the vehicles, increased rotation of cleaning and hygiene when considering the totes that we transport the goods on in our delivery vehicles as well, a hyper rotation of hygienic protocols and so on being introduced to make sure that everything is as safe as it possibly could be. So of course we had to deal with quite a lot of challenges and work around that to make sure that we were doing everything that we needed to do so that everything was as safe as possible. So we had to do that extremely quickly, and it was very, very successfully as well. Of course, with special attention to any areas in which our staff or our vehicles were coming into contact with our customers and so on, and so making sure that interaction was as seamless as possible, and working with other companies' COVID-19 related protocols as well. So making sure that we were heavily aligned there. But yeah, on a grander scale, looking at new opportunities from folks that were interested in automating their own transportation networks. Most recently we announced expansion into Michigan in partnership with Planet M program there, looking at ways to address COVID-19 in the state of Michigan, and plenty of other opportunities as well. So really it has been busy, but wanting to ensure that we are doing everything that we're doing, expanding and scaling quickly in the safest way possible for ourselves and for everybody that we serve.
Now, quite a few of you said that one should never allow a crisis to go to waste, in the sense that oftentimes in situations like this, insightful opportunities present themselves. I haven't been on an airplane since early February. I'm not sure when I will personally feel comfortable to get on a plane, but I have been more in touch with many of my customers and partners using technology during this period much more intensely. When you guys think about the future of work and work streams and the mixture between high tech and high touch, the ability to conduct, both your internal and market facing business in the foreseeable future, what kind of changes, if any, are you making in the way that you're organizing your teams and your customer facing and market facing, as well as internal interactions? And what advice would you give other managing directors and CEOs, heads of companies, based on your experience, as we go forward and try to also figure out how much of it is here to stay and be fully integrated, and how much of it is just a phase that might reverse itself? Mark, shall we?
I can take a stab at that. I think if you think about even something like grocery delivery, right? It's gone from 2 to 3% of the market to 20 to 30%. The big barrier to adoption of that is just installing the app, putting in your credit card details, making your first order, going through, figuring it out. Once you've done that, you realize, hey, this is a much more convenient way to get groceries when I need them. I don't have to go drive down there, park, go in, wait in the line, wander all the aisles, trying to find toilet paper or whatever. I can just use my phone, stuff shows up at my door. I think that so at some point, people are going to feel safe going to the grocery store again. but I think that it's not going to go down to 2 to 3% where it was before. Maybe it pulls back a little bit, but the sheer convenience factor is just a net huge improvement. And likewise, when you think about the travel, business travelers, I have a friend who logged, he said 1,900 hours of travel in 2019, which is more than a full-time job's worth of time spent in airports, in Ubers, waiting on flights. And he's just finding that he can be massively more productive now when a face-to-face meeting can happen around the world with the click of a button. So what are the long-term implications of that in terms of how do you reach your customers? For us, we decided a number of years ago that video was going to be really a core competency of the organization in terms of communicating the product that we're building and communicating the story of the company. And so we internalized video production, made that something that we just do on a regular basis to inform our shareholders, to inform our customers of progress and development. And that's something I advise every startup that asks for advice on what to do is it makes, if you can bring that video experience and video production internal to your company and be able to tell your story that way, for every roadshow virtual meeting that we do now, we just play a 5-minute video and then go right to Q&A. So it's instead of, it's like giving your best pitch 100% of the time with appropriate music and visuals going on. So you can end up telling your story much more quickly in a much more engaging way than with a 20 slide PowerPoint deck. And so that, I think that effort that we did early on has really paid dividends in this most recent COVID era. And I think a lot of that's going to maintain true going forward, because I just don't see, I think that the veil has been pierced on the idea that you've got to fly across the country for a 30-minute meeting. I mean, just in terms of sustainability of transportation, it makes no sense. In terms of maintaining a sleep schedule, it makes no sense. And now everybody's got the apps installed. So that'd be my advice.
So let me ask you, Michael, would you be completely comfortable doing a diligence on a prospective company without ever setting foot on their premises in this new environment?
This is a question that's getting asked a lot in the venture community. And, I think I have to say yes. As Mark said, it's kind of funny because during this period, whether we're looking at a local company here in Tel Aviv or a company in Latin America, the experience is just about the same. As was said, it's not clear when things will get to a point where we can safely travel the way we used to. I agree a lot with what Mark said in terms of people have been surprised at how much this format can actually give, and whether whatever abstract difference there is between this and in person is worth all of the hassle and expense that we've been accustomed to. Yes, I would in a normal world not choose to invest in people that sitting in the room across from them, seeing the body language and visiting them on site. But even though we haven't yet pulled the trigger on a deal that we only were introduced to since the crisis began, I think we've gotten far enough along with several that we were willing to do that. So the answer to the question is yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question, and those are great points raised. I guess a couple of thoughts from me. Number one, in terms of what we do, we're wholly customer focused. With I think the reason why we've been able to get as far as we've got in such a short space of time is our big retail partnerships, customers like Walmart and other Fortune 500 customers across North America. So everything we're doing is always meeting their needs. And with the explosion of COVID, we had to very quickly enter into a lot of discussions with our customers about how we could best meet the needs of their consumers as quickly as possible. So that required, some very, very interesting discussions with different customers about how to do that best. Lots of discussions going on behind the scenes around, greater integration between, systems, customer-facing systems, our customer systems, their consumer-facing systems, our own, and so on, to make sure that we're able to offer the best service possible. So it was, even more dedicated customer focus than usual, if that's possible. From a more internal company standpoint, I should say, we found ourselves to be incredibly productive, I think, as many have, realizing that there's a lot of stuff we can do without traveling across North America day and night, and as Mark rightly said, losing sleep over it as we do. So it's been a welcome change, I think, in some respects. I was joking with the panel before about my kids wandering into this discussion, so there are always those challenges, but that aside, it's been a productive time for us, though we have to straddle two lines in that our work will necessarily involve, as we are deemed an essential service, quote unquote, in terms of the supplies that we're delivering on behalf of our customers. We're always going to have a major frontline component to our business, which will be operational, let's say operations based. Though behind the scenes, we're figuring out ever more increasing ways to be super effective, I think, through all of the wonders of modern technology. So it's been an interesting time to adjust, but it's been good.
Yeah, in many instances, we see the initial adverse impact of the more established transportation and mobility companies in the sense that one of the first things that they did is step on the brakes, stop discretionary spending, reassess. A lot of the things that you would hope every company will do in a period like this. And of course, as we get through it and we see some of the major OEs begin to regroup and restart operations, it will be also interesting to watch consumer purchasing trends and behaviors to begin to assess, what kind of recovery trajectory our businesses may experience. Those of us who are depending on the incumbents in some fashion. What advice, Tarek, if you had the chance to meet with the CEOs of Daimler and VW and GM and Ford all in one room, what kind of advice from a disruptor point of view would you give the incumbents as they are continuing to be challenged by additional layers of disruption?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the challenges sort of the incumbent auto cos have is just that these are massive organizations that are made up of different bureaucracies, and so while that's good for certain product planning and development, it can be really challenging to play catch up on. And so kind of separating at a separate unit that's able to really drive innovation is probably a good thing. And then second is you've got sort of a classic innovator's dilemma in a way, which is that they've got a profitable business, profitable most of the time, business, selling vehicles in the traditional way. And that's what their shareholders sort of pay them or pay the management team to do. And so it can be hard to make the trade-offs of investing in sort of the next wave of what mobility is really going to look like. And I think they've really tuned into this over the last several years and made a push for it. But If anything, I would sort of advise to accelerate that trend as much as possible, because it seems like consumers are increasingly making buying decisions on technical capability and mobility utility. Like if I can, to use the scooter example that Michael did, convenience of using a scooter is more important than owning a car, and sort of what that used to mean in terms of a token of freedom for people. And so I would sort of urge them to diversify into mobility, and also try to move technology forward as quickly as possible as consumers sort of buy based on technology enabled features rather than traditional brands.
Okay, we have a question from one of our participants about sustainability, and how are you, whether from an investing perspective or from an impact in operating perspective, how are you focusing on sustainability in mobility, and, if you will, decarbonizing the world through your specific actions?
You want me to take that?
Sure.
So, my entry portal into this to begin with, about close to 20 years ago, was a feeling that the monopoly that oil had on global transportation was a vulnerability from a security perspective, from an economic perspective, and of course also from an environmental perspective. And and I came to see actually the silver bullet for breaking that monopoly to be electric. And I've believed now for 15 years that electrification of at least ground transportation is an inevitability, and never stop believing that. But what's changed more recently, as we've referred to, is that the electrification of ground transportation doesn't necessarily have to mean going from a gas guzzling SUV to an SUV with a big battery. It could mean diversifying the modes of vehicles, as evidenced again by the electric scooter, by the electric moped, or kick scooters, which is my vehicle of choice to get around Tel Aviv, or an electric bicycle, or even other vehicles like Mark's, for example. And I think we're in this age of digital mobility, which effectively means that we can buy trips where we used to just buy kind of one vehicle that would serve all purposes for a number of years. And when we buy the trip, we can conveniently decide what makes sense for that trip, and that seems to actually go hand in hand with more sustainable models for the environment as well. Here in Israel, it's always been the case that we run an experiment no one else in the world does, which is a one-day year. And Yom Kippur, there's no cars, like literally no one in the country drives for 25 hours. And the air quality studies that are done indicate that just taking the tailpipes off the road for a single day really brings all of the emissions and all of the air quality issues that we have to deal with and hardly even notice, because they're just part of our daily existence. It brings those down to such a level with one day of taking tailpipes off the road. So, in the last few months with the lockdowns, people in other cities have gotten a chance to experience what it's like to have very low level of traffic and therefore have that high air quality. And I hope that people are going to get addicted to that and are going to insist that policies be put in place to make it easy for that to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, I would tend to just echo, Michael, what you said in terms of the sustainable transportation is not simply replacing a drivetrain and using the same 7-passenger vehicles to carry one person around to go get a cup of coffee, but the actual and to that point, I mean, to your question, Avi, the whole purpose of Arcimoto is to drive sustainability in transportation, and we see that as I guess one of the sayings that's been a motivator for me over time is that perfection is just a direction. So we aim to be continuously improving in the aim of sustainability. We launched a product that's 173.7 miles per gallon equivalent, which is I think by any measure incredibly efficient relative to what's on the road today. But that's not our long-term mission, is to get into the 200s and beyond. And that's really just to put a plug in for our partnership with you. You know, we came out on the road with a 2-passenger vehicle that weighs 1,300 pounds. And one of the ways we can make it more efficient is to make it lighter. So we teamed up with Exponential Works to say, what are some components of this vehicle that are very low-hanging fruit for weight reduction? And inside of 30 days, Avi and his team had dropped 30 pounds of weight just by optimizing 5 different parts of the vehicle. And that is a piece that, as we are going to scale, reducing weight and reducing cost are our 2 big goals. And that has benefits, obviously, for our customers, but also for just the overall efficiency and sustainability of our product family.
And we would definitely love to expand that partnership all the way to production. I have another question from the audience, and that is about predictions. When do you guys think that we get to level 4 autonomy, if you had to take a prediction? And when do you think that the scales tip fully in favor of EVs?
I'm happy to start if you like.
Sure.
Sure. So it's a great question. I think it's one that's been floating around the industry for the best part of a decade, perhaps a lot longer, to be honest. And I'll start by saying that personally, I believe that one of the challenges with the AV industry as a whole, certainly in terms of public or customer perception and beyond, has been something of a mismanagement of expectations. There's been a number of fairly lofty promises made, and certainly I think it's fair to say, and no one would disagree, that not all of those have been kept. So, it's no surprise that there's some work to do in terms of instilling that confidence. In terms of a timeline to get to level 4, in terms of genuine level 4, we would probably see that as perhaps 3 to 5 years away in level 5, if it's even possible. 10 years plus. I'm not an engineer by trade, but through my layman's understanding, this is certainly what I would believe to be true. And I'll come back to our own, not to be too self-serving, but our own use case with this and why we're doing what we're doing. It's constraining the problem of autonomy. So rather than, this is what we always say, rather than going after the autonomy in general, the holy grail of autonomy, if you like, or that moonshot, by constraining the challenge of autonomy and going after the middle mile specifically with fixed predetermined routes, we're able, we're doing this now. We've been on the road for a year doing it public roads. So it's a no-brainer as far as AV is concerned, I think, in terms of being able to get things moving well. Lots of other folks, much smarter than I am, are working on some of the level 4 and level 5 challenges, but I think we're still a little ways away.
Eric, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I think this is a common question, and the follow-up is, what do we mean by level 4? There's trucking, there's tightly ring-fenced neighborhoods that have been rehearsed millions of times. There's, can I get from the city to the country? How random can my destination be? And these all have sort of different answers. I think in the more constrained applications, which Richard was laying out, those are not too far away from some implementations of reliable level 4 activity. For things like broad ride hailing, where this is really a massive business, and beyond that, there are we're all as a sector confronting the challenge that as you solve the effort that went into solving 95% of the problem is maybe equal to the effort required to solve the last 5%, because you're now doing the really hard stuff. All the low-hanging fruit has been picked. And that's part of what WaveSense is trying to solve by this very uncorrelated independent application. But I do think one of the side effects you're seeing of this is there's sort of a, we could sort of call it like an autonomy dividend that's redounding to other vehicles where, I may not be able to, page an autonomous vehicle here in Boston, and take it to go get lunch somewhere. But the technology on passenger vehicles that's going to come out in the next 5 years, that is a direct result of all the investment and work that's gone on in the pursuit of level 4, is really incredible. And so, while we can't put an exact time frame on, when the level 4 product will be broadly adopted, I do think we can say that there's been, pretty amazing leaps and bounds made in terms of products for the passenger vehicle side, and that ultimately we will. I'm curious at this panel. Ultimately, I think that there's a consensus that we will get there, and the type of application and when is up for grabs.
Michael?
I'm the guy who in 2008 predicted that EVs would dominate by 2015. So I don't know if you want to listen to me, but I also
you can refine it now.
I also didn't expect the shale revolution to unpeak U.S. oil production in 2011, which is why I think the last decade was not the decade of EVs, but this will be the decade of EVs. I'm pretty sure that no matter what happens to oil or its price or anything else, because of what's already in the pipeline and the way that people are now understanding it, and also the effect that Tesla's had on helping people understand what EVs are and what they're capable of. On the AV side, as has been said, it's all a question of what you actually mean. I think that most people are talking about, when will my robotic taxi be there? When will I hit the Uber button and there won't be a driver? And I actually think that that's going to be not before the latter part of this decade. I actually think there are actually some more interesting mobility things to be working on before then. While that has a place in it, once it contributes to safety and efficiency, which I think it will ultimately, it'll be great. But right now, we're not there yet, and there's a lot else to focus on in mobility world. So I'm glad that sort of the whole idea of new mobility is no longer kind of synonymous with level 4 autonomy, because there's a lot more that we can do.
Mark, I'm going to give you the last word since you're actually building EVs already. When is the AV technology coming to Archimoto?
Yeah, so and we look at the Archimoto platform as an ideal host of autonomous vehicle technology. So we're not building the sensors, we're not building the software stack, we're building the underlying platform that's really great for delivery of food and goods and people, ultimately. In terms of when does that show up in a in the market, scalable, usable, I think for certain applications we'll see it relatively soon. You already have companies out there like Nuro that are doing grocery delivery with autonomous vehicles. In terms of when the electric vehicle becomes just the no-brainer vehicle to buy for a consumer, I think we're basically already there. If you compare the experience of driving a Tesla to driving any gas car, it's leagues beyond. It's a whole different world of vehicle experience, and they're just marching steadily down the cost curve to the point where it will, already from a total cost of ownership standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense to buy a new gas car. But ultimately, the sticker price is gonna drop below a comparable gas car, and at that point, it's over. So for us, our goal is just simply to say, well, if 80% of the trips on the road can be satisfied with a much, much more efficient platform, then we should figure out how to make it so that 80% of the vehicles on the road are on that platform or ones like it. And that's really that's going to be our push as we go to scale both of the human-driven vehicles and then ultimately of the self-driven Archimotos.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your experience and insights and for sharing your precious time with us in our community. Thank you, Michael, Richard, Tarek, and Mark. And before we leave today, I wanted to remind everybody that next week, the week after next, on the 16th, we will have our next panel discussion under the heading of the 3D Printing Leadership Forum. And the discussion is going to be centered primarily around Industry 4.0, nearshoring, onshoring, and the implications on supply chain resiliency and lessons learned during COVID for the manufacturing community. This particular webinar, today's webinar, will be posted later today for all of you who have not yet had a chance to listen and tune in. And we invite you to register on the link for our next July 16 webinar on Industry 4.0. Thank you so much for taking this journey with us, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, Avi. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep in touch.